This is Smart by Shel Silverstein. My dad gave me $1 bill 'cause I'm his smartest son, and I swapped it for 2 shining quarters 'cause 2 is more than 1. And then I took the quarters and traded them to Lou for 3 dimes. I guess he didn't know that 3 is more than 2. Just then along came old blind Bates, and just 'cause he can't see, he gave me 4 nickels for my 3 dimes, and 4 is more than 3. And I took the nickels to Hiram Coombs down at the seed feed store, and the fool gave me 5 pennies for them, and 5 is more than 4. And then I went and showed my dad, and he got red in the cheeks, and closed his eyes and shook his head. Too proud of me to speak. Welcome back to Reason to Refrain, where it is my goal for you to know what you believe and why you believe it, and to preach the gospel of resurrection by grace alone, through faith alone, over and over again. I am your host, Stephen Curto. Please feel free to talk back to the show by emailing Stephen@reasonedrefrain.com. That's Stephen, Stephen, the correct spelling, at reasonedrefrain.com. Drink of the day is I think I'm pronouncing this correctly, Boulevardier. It is basically a Manhattan, but with Campari instead of normal bitters. And I actually quite enjoy it more than a Manhattan. I've never had Campari cocktails, but I will be having more of them. Plus, it's so pretty, right? I mean, look at that color. If you're only listening, you can't look at this color, but if you're watching, you can. You see that deep red. Yeah, it's also, I mean, it's the equivalent of Negroni, I think is the other cocktail, but that uses gin instead of rye bourbon, which is what this is. This is made with bullet rye, Campari, and what's the third thing? Sweet vermouth, with a little orange rind garnish. Let's go ahead and get into the show. We've got quite a bit since I missed last week. My apologies. Stuff came up. Life has been busy lately. I won't bore you with the details, but we will get into my 3 favorite news stories from the last week.
It's my 3 favorite news stories from the last week.
And my first isn't really a favorite. It's actually very much a non-favorite. It is the $1.9 trillion spending bill that was passed by the two chambers of Congress and signed by President Biden. I'll say that again. 1.9 trillion. With a T. I forget, there was an SNL bit that was surprisingly funny because it's surprising when SNL is funny anymore, which is sad. Where Elizabeth Warren was the bit was she was answering questions on the press junket, and then somebody asked her fake character, obviously, what was she going to do to balance the budget? Like what about spending? And then she goes, oh, when you get up into these trillions of $22 trillion, what does that even? It's like 22 flobbity bajillion dollars. They're all made up numbers anyway. It doesn't matter. And it's not satire anymore, unfortunately. It's just the reality. The idea that spending just doesn't matter, and where the idea that government has money to spend. And think for a second, where does government get its assets? It gets all of its assets from the people, taken against their will, by force. The end result for a government, for somebody who refuses to pay taxes, who refuses to pay into the system of Nero, then people in black suits with big guns will show up at your door and arrest you or kill you if you resist. This is the government is just a gun. Government has no money. Government only has money, only has stuff that was taken from other people. It does not create anything. Its purpose biblically is to punish evildoers and praise the good, and that's all. The idea that, back up a little bit, just the idea of what is money, even that is foreign to, I think, most of our populace, most of our culture. The average person in the United States does not have an accurate idea of what money is. And the simplest way to explain what money is to say it is a language. Money is a common language by which we ascribe value, right? Think back to I think I've talked about this on the show before. Think back to the olden days, right, where you had a trade system. You showed up at the general store with 6 pelts of animals that you'd killed, and you trade those 6 pelts for 3 pounds of flour and some rice and a new wagon wheel and a tool. And it was like, well, the basic idea of this free market trade is I want your 6 pelts and you want these items in my store. And then eventually it got to this point where let's have a common unit that we can agree on. My 6 pelts is worth this many things, and we'll call those dollars. And this bag of rice is worth $4, and this bag of flour is worth $2. And we'll put this all into a common language so that it translates, and then we'll trade. That's what money is. It is a language for ascribing subjective value. Money isn't worth anything of itself. Money is worth what you ascribe to it. You trade your time at your job and your labor at your job for X number of dollars. You've said 1 hour of my time is worth this many dollars to me, and I can use those dollars, that language, to go and buy something that I want. I can trade my time, my labor, my skills, my effort for stuff that I want. That's all money is. Somebody hands you $60,000. The only reason that has any value is because you give it value. Collectively, we have all said, okay, this is the agreed upon language. And eventually, the reality is that language is going to break down. A new language will take over. The U.S. dollar will no longer be the universal currency, and it's going to be faster than we expected. And something else is going to take its place. We're going to collectively say, yeah, this piece of paper that's backed by the word and good faith of the U.S. government no longer has any value. I don't want to trade my time for that. Instead, I'll trade my time for those 6 pieces of shiny metal over there. Gold standard. What a concept. That would be a better language. Or, if you're particularly feeling frisky, it'll be some sort of electronic currency like Bitcoin. That's what money is. And so this spending bill basically just tries to game the system. All spending bills are trying to game the system. This one in particular, where it's just a blanket, will send you a check. We'll send you money, which we took from you and other Americans, and it'll feel like you're getting something out of this. You're not getting anything out of it. There's a great meme that explains this very clearly. It's the cake meme, right? Where you've got a cake and it shows somebody cutting out a piece of it, and then in the next frame they're picking up all of the cake except for the one piece. That's what this spending bill is. The cake is your money, and the one piece is the $1,400 check that's coming to you from this $1.9 trillion spending bill, and it's taking the rest of your stuff and spending it on crap that you don't get to see. I was talking with a friend about this the other day. My philosophy of government is, like I've said before, I value freedom over safety. I value value freedom over a lot of things, and I think that the role of the government is extremely limited, biblically speaking. And a true reality of my philosophy of government is that what I would say would be goods that could be produced do not come about as quickly. What do I mean by this? The example that came up in this conversation was lighthouse. There's a classic example of who's going to build the lighthouse. If without government, you've got ships that are going through the night, and they don't have any, in theory, they don't have any incentive to build a lighthouse just for them, because it's going to cost them a lot of money and a lot of manpower and a lot of time, and they're just going to take the risk of floating out in the dark. And if their ship runs aground, there's not going to be enough of an incentive for them to get together and build a lighthouse. So the government comes along and builds a lighthouse, and that is a positive net good for everybody. Everybody benefits from it, because a lighthouse tells you where there's land and ships aren't going to run aground. Everybody who's got a ship commonly benefits. And I'm saying, actually, I think that a lighthouse will still get built. I think that enough people who own ships lose enough ships, they're going to come together and say, maybe the 2 of us, maybe the 3 of us, the 6 of us could get together and build a lighthouse, and we'll stop losing all these ships. Keep running up against the ground. The other example that kind of illustrates this is the firefighter. Who's going to build the fire? Who's going to be firefighters? You need the government provided service of firefighting, because the cost of not having a fire department that comes and puts out a fire is so great but so immediate and not felt enough that people will actually produce that good on their own without some sort of an external stimulus that other people will argue has to come from the government. And again, I'm saying no. Eventually, people will get together and say, I'm tired of houses burning down. I'm tired. I lost my house. This is the 3rd house I've lost to a fire. Let's put together a system freely where we'll agree to come and put each other's houses out when there's a fire. Fire insurance. We could. There are ways to privatize this. Is my point. You could very easily imagine a system where people purchase the right to have firefighter services, where part of your insurance plan and the insurance companies have a firefighting service, and the insurance company has an interest in providing that service to you as a member of their pool, so that they don't have to pay as much for the damage if your house burns to the ground versus if just a small portion of it burns. So they've got the incentive. You've got the incentive because you don't want your house to burn to the ground. The people who would work as firefighters would have the incentive to earn a paycheck by doing this. And the incentive of altruism, which does come from within, compelled by the conscience. So my point is, there is such a possibility of this service being privatized, of coming about by the interactions of free individuals as opposed to government force, government interaction. However, the big cost is time. It is not as efficient and effective as quickly as the government would be. If the government just comes in and says, you have to have a firefighting service. We're gonna steal from everybody in the community, and we're gonna pay for a fire service, and everybody benefits from it. Everybody equally gets access to call the firemen when their house is on fire. Yeah, that's going to be more effective. Fewer houses are going to burn down in the short term. In the long term, you're going to get stuck with, you're not going to have any kind of innovation of how to fight fires, and you're going to stifle the growth and creativity of humans, and you're going to stifle freedom. You're going to steal from people against their will and insist on providing them a service that they didn't necessarily ask for and they might never use. I say that that's a net loss. I would rather have freedom and the idea of individual private property. That's the value judgment that I make. It's a harsher, less safe, less efficient and effective in the short term way of thinking and living. In the long term, more free, and ultimately produces better goods and services. And I think it's eminently biblical, but, what do I know? How did I get off on this tangent? All this to say, all of this because the government has decided, the federal government, on top of that, I'm open to discussions about smaller communities collectively, freely deciding to establish governments that do these things. I live in Jersey Village, Texas, and Jersey Village is its own city, technically speaking. It's within the city limits of Houston. But we have a city council, and this city does a whole lot of stuff, and it's very active. I know a lot of the people who are in the city government here, and there's this small local government feel and stuff that gets done that I personally am opposed to the government doing, but I'm a little bit more okay with it on this very small local level where I can easily, leave if I want to. I don't have to participate in this system. And also I'm renting, so I don't have to pay the property taxes. So there's that whole component as well. But nothing like a little hypocrisy, right? All of this is the $1.9 trillion spending bill. The dollar will collapse. That's the reality. Our economy cannot survive. We are perched on a really, really, really thin bubble now. And you're going to be sent $1,400 that is actually worth $1,000, and then will actually be worth $50, and then will actually be worth nothing, because money is only worth what you ascribe to it subjectively, and what our society collectively, subjectively ascribes to it. And this is the action that will collectively, subjectively devalue it. Moving on, as a long rant on one news story. Second news story. The Pope hasn't read the Bible. That's an interesting thing. So, reading from... I'm going to read from Not the Bee just because. The headline, Pope Francis warns Earth will face a second great flood due to climate change, and he seems to be forgetting a very specific promise from God in the Bible. No longer a sarcastic retort, it now seems to be a legitimate question. Is the Pope Catholic? We now seem to be constantly inundated with stories of Pope Francis saying things that are, to put it kindly, out of step with traditional Catholicism. He has been especially outspoken on what he considers to be sin related to climate. The Pope has gone as far as to say that COVID-19 may be a punishment from nature apart from God for our sins against the climate. Even knowing all this, I was not prepared to see this headline on my newsfeed today. Here's the headline. In a new book published yesterday by Pope Francis, he warns that humanity faces a second great flood if humans fail to address climate change. The 84-year-old said that in the story of the Great Flood in the Bible, God used his wrath to punish injustice and clean up, quote, the world. He then added that humanity is facing another, quote, great deluge, perhaps due to a rise in a temperature and the melting of glaciers. That is what will happen now if we continue on the same path, he said. So he's saying that climate change is going to produce a second great deluge. And so I'm going to read just a portion of Genesis 9. Tell me if you can spot the inconsistency with God's words. Okay, so this is Genesis 9, verse 8. Then God said to Noah and to his sons with him, Behold, I establish my covenant with you and your offspring after you, and with every living creature that is with you, the birds, the livestock, and every beast of the earth with you, as many as came out of the ark, for it is for every beast of the earth. I establish my covenant with you, that never again shall all flesh be cut off by the waters of the flood, and never again shall there be a flood to destroy the earth. Huh. I'm just going to leave that there. Moving on to our third news story. A sarcastic quote pastor made an interesting claim on TikTok. So we're going to go ahead and watch it's a TikTok sermon. because that's a thing now, unfortunately. So here we go. This is a guy saying stuff about Jesus.
Did you know that there's a part of the Gospel of Mark where Jesus uses a racial slur? In Mark chapter 7, there's the...
Can you guess where he's going? He's going to head towards the Syrophoenician woman with, it is not right to give what is holy to the dogs, which I've addressed on this podcast before. If you go look at the episode called Friendship, Evangelism, and the Pig Dogs, I think is the name of the episode. Keep listening to his word thingies.
Account of the Syrophoenician woman, a woman who is Syrian and Greek, both of which there were strong biases against within the Jewish community. And she comes to ask Jesus to heal her daughter who's possessed by a demon. And what is Jesus' response? He says, "It's not good for me to give the children's food," meaning the children of Israel's food, "to dogs." He calls her a dog.
Yes, he does. And props to him. He at the very least knew it's not right to give the children's food to the dogs, and the children is the Jews, the people of Israel. So, good on you. He calls her a dog. He hasn't said anything wrong yet.
What's amazing about this account is that the woman doesn't back down. She speaks truth to power.
Hold on. She speaks truth to power. Okay, so think about that phrase for just a second, okay? Take the flippant, extremely sarcastic, dismissive tone out. Seriously think about that. If we're going to say that this woman speaks truth to power, the power in question is Jesus, meaning in contrast to that, she's speaking truth, which would mean that the object power is not truth. Do you see the problem with this? Do you remember how Jesus defines himself repeatedly throughout the Gospels? I am the way, the truth. So, aside from the ridiculous philosophical Nietzschean undertones of speaking truth to power and all that crap, it's linguistically farcical, and then it gets even worse. So she speaks truth to power. I'm going to back it up just a little bit so you can.
What's amazing about this account is that the woman doesn't back down. She speaks truth to power. She confronts Jesus and says, "Well, you can think that about me, but even dogs deserve the crumbs from the table."
Very, very sly. I gotta think that this one was intentional. She says, "Well, you can think that about me, but even dogs deserve the crumbs from the table." No, what she said was, even dogs deserve the crumbs from the table. She doesn't communicate this little precursor adjustment to Jesus's words and make clear that, well, I don't really think I'm a dog. No, she does think that she's a dog. That's kind of the point. She recognizes her own lowly state and need for grace. The point of this is that she agrees with Jesus, not that she confronts Jesus. We'll keep listening.
Her boldness and bravery to speak truth to power actually changes Jesus' mind. Jesus repents of his racism and extends healing to this woman's daughter.
Oh, blasphemy. And that's literally true. He just accused Jesus of being a racist. She confronts Jesus of his racism and speaks truth to power, and then he repents of his racism. This is... You want to know what this really is? Where does this start? Where does damnable theology like this start? It starts with the rejection of the Bible as the sole sufficient authority for the Christian on earth, available to us. It starts by saying, yeah, well, has God really said, fill in the blank? And eventually where that leads is Jesus can be a racist who has to repent of his racism. We deny the Trinity, we deny the divinity of Jesus, we deny the sinlessness, the impeccability of Christ. He is merely some sort of a moral precursor example for us to follow, not a perfect savior, a perfect sacrifice who pays the penalty of our sins and saves us by grace alone, through faith alone, not by works of the law.
I love this story because it's a reminder that Jesus is human. He had prejudices and bias, and when confronted with it, he was willing to do his work. And this woman was willing to stand up and speak truth.
Truth in the face of the truth. Done with that. The reason I hope if you're a listener of this show, you're probably in one of two categories. You either are as appalled by this as I am, or you have no idea what any of this is. I would think that the only two people who would listen to my show are the more theologically inclined, and those who think I'm completely ridiculous and consider the religious worldview and the Christian worldview absurd. So hopefully, whichever category you're in, you recognize that that's crazy. That's ridiculous. That is an absurd take on Christianity. This man is not a Christian. He is not a pastor. He is he's an activist. And that's actually how he describes himself on his Twitter. Before Christian, or he doesn't even say Christian, the descriptions he gives himself in his Twitter thing is author, activist, theologian, he, him. Gotta make sure we know those pronouns. Oh, we're done with that. I have more than 3 favorite news stories because I missed last week, so just deal with it. We're doing extra news stories. It'll be a fairly long 3 favorite news stories because it'll be more like 5 favorite news stories. Well, only 4. This is the last one. I had to include this because it warmed my heart and it stirred up some hope in me. Jordan Peterson on a recent Jordan Peterson podcast talked a little bit about Jesus, and his thinking on this has changed. And I have a couple friends who I've said for a while, I think Jordan Peterson will convert to Christianity, or at the very least he'll become like a Kierkegaardian Christian, where I think he probably believed the gospel but doesn't really use normal Orthodox language, and he'll be one who's refined or saved as through fire, and lots of stuff gets burned up in the chaff. You can argue with me about that later, about whether or not Kierkegaard was a Christian. And Jordan Peterson just has that kind of a mind, who's very philosophical, very he's got the psychology frame of mind, and he thinks like Jung did. And you hear him talking about Jesus and his reason. If you don't know, I mean, Jordan Peterson was a major thinker, kind of on the circuit of the. He's not conservative. Classical liberal is probably more accurate. He came to fame when he refused to go along with hate speech laws about transgenderism in Canada. He's Canadian, and then had kind of a following just thinking and being a thought leader in critical thought, or in a common sense, really. But so then he got addicted to painkillers and spent a lot of time out of the public eye, and now he's dealing with life addicted to painkillers through kind of deception. Like, it wasn't like an intentional, like I'm turning to these to try and numb the pain. It's like his doctor prescribed him, and he didn't know the side effects and how drastic they could be. So I want to give him a little bit of grace on that. He's still, but this was a recent episode of the Jordan Peterson podcast, and he's talking, the episode's about, he's talking to this guy who does art for lots of Eastern Orthodox religions, and he's an artist, and he thinks about symbolism and mythology, and so they're talking, so I'll just play it and you can hear what they're talking about.
To some degree, the conscience can be viewed as the voice of reciprocal society within, and that's a perfectly reasonable biological explanation. But the thing is the deeper you go into biology, the more it shades into something that appears to be religious, because you start analyzing the fundamental structure of the psyche itself, and it becomes something. Well, it becomes something with a power that transcends your ability to resist it. So you can think about Christ from a psychological perspective, and my critic, this particular critic that I've been reading, said, well, that doesn't differentiate Christ much from a whole sequence of dying and resurrecting mythological gods. And of course, people have made that claim in comparative religion. Joseph Campbell did that, and Jung to a lesser degree, I would say, but Campbell did that. But the difference, and C.S. Lewis pointed this out as well, the difference between those mythological gods and Christ was that there's a representation of, there's a historical representation of his existence as well. Now you can debate whether or not that's genuine. You can debate about whether or not he actually lived and whether there's credible objective evidence for that, but it doesn't matter in some sense, because this, well, it does, but there's a sense in which it doesn't matter because there's still a historical story. And so what you have in the figure of Christ is an actual person who actually lived, plus a myth. And in some sense, Christ is the union of those two things. The problem is I probably believe that, but I don't know. I'm amazed at my own belief, and I don't understand it. Like, because I've seen sometimes the objective world and the narrative world touch. You know, that's Jungian synchronicity. And I've seen that many times in my own life. And so in some sense, I believe it's undeniable. You know, we have a narrative sense of the world. For me, that's been the world of morality. That's the world that tells us how to act. It's real. Like, we treat it like it's real. It's not the objective world. But the narrative and the objective world touch. And the ultimate example of that, in principle, is supposed to be Christ. But I don't know what to... that seems to me oddly plausible.
Yeah.
But I still don't know what to make of it. It's too... partly because it's too terrifying a reality to fully believe. I don't even know what would happen to you if you fully believed it.
If you believed in the story of Christ, or if you believed that history and let's say the narrative meet, let's
both,
say.
I think you... Because when you believe that, you buy both those stories. You believe that the narrative and the objective can actually touch.
Yeah.
So, for those of you who aren't really philosophy junkies or anything like that, or haven't, he's using language that is not common to the average Christian or even the average man. It's very common to the classicist and to the philosopher. The narrative reality and the objective reality and how they touch. And he says the fulfillment of that is Christ. It's in principle. And what I love about Jordan Peterson is that the guy thinks. He is willing to follow a train of reasoning and then accept the conclusion if all of the premises are valid. And I pray for Jordan Peterson. I really do think that he is on the cusp of believing the true gospel. He is to use his own common terminology, he's on the verge of puzzling out that he is a rebellious sinner who must lay down his arms for his rebellion against a holy and righteous God. His experience of pain and suffering and then addiction and his own shortcomings are bringing the reality of his sinfulness to light and his need for a savior. And he's finding that in Christ, and he's doing it in his Jungian and philosophical way. But I'm excited to see where it goes. Jordan Peterson finally realizing the truth, laying down his weapons and saying, not my will but thine. It will be interesting to see where it goes. He has been a favorite thinker of mine for a while. And he's an honest thinker. And so I'm excited. We'll go ahead and leave that there. We'll move on to COVID Minute.
In a COVID minute, everything can change. In a COVID minute, things can get a little strange.
Strange. Yeah. So a couple of news stories from the last 2 weeks that relate to COVID that are worth mentioning in the COVID Minute. First of all, Texas is ending its mandatory mask mandates, and I am very, very grateful for that. A lot of hay was made out of this this announcement. Texas Governor Greg Abbott came on and made this announcement of his upcoming executive order, and to massive applause from the general masses, for which I think he deserves none. I actually wrote a blog post, first one in a while, I've actually written. Yeah, I am glad that he is reversing his previous unjust, unconstitutional overreaches of executive authority and exercise of governmental power to limit the freedom of individuals, and he is reversing those things. Accepting applause from the people you have sinned against by overreaching and unjustly wielding authority that you did not rightly possess is a little bit on the line, right? Like maybe don't do that. Maybe apologize for your terrible policies that you inflicted on the people of Texas for 344 days, and say, I never should have told you all that you can't operate your businesses freely or operate according to your consciences or associate however you wish. Maybe do that. No, instead, applause. Love me, I'm a generous God. The actual order, so it took me a while to find it, because again, the journalists of today are not journalists. They don't go and find the actual sources. They just repeat whatever other journalists said. So the actual executive order reverses not even all of the previous executive orders, just most. And it basically says if you are in an area of low hospitalization rates, and what he means by low hospitalization rates is if your total hospital population, if less than 15% of that is COVID patients in your county, then your county can't have mask mandates from the government, from the county government, and but they're still masks are still encouraged, and businesses, your county can't limit your business capacity. So restaurants, you can have 100% capacity as long as you're in a low hospitalization rate area, and there's only like 3 counties left that still have high hospitalization rates. So that's basically all of Texas, which again is evidence that none of this should have happened. That not even 50% of the hospitals. Even the hot spots, it never got to like 50%. It never got to where it was like, my goodness, we're in serious trouble. The overflow facilities of the Harris County hospitals, the Dallas hospitals, were never particularly precarious. But I'll let you go find all that data on yourself, because you're free individual thinking people. This order specifically says that individual businesses can still require masks for anybody who enters their business. And I say, amen. Business owners deciding what to do with their business. Great. Let's just try a little bit of freedom. Yeah? Like just a little bit. Not even a lot, just a little. Just let people try a little bit of liberty, because that's kind of like the founding philosophy of our country. So just a hair. Government wants to, or a business wants to require a mask. I say amen. I probably won't be going there because of my own physical, medical limitations and my philosophical, moral issues with it. I might still go there. Like I can put on a mask for 5 to 10 minutes or so without any repercussions physically. So if I really want to use the service or patronize the business, then I will, and if I don't, then I won't. Free association, it's a great thing. Yes and amen. Also in the COVID minute, from elsewhere in the country, a couple of good Not the Bee articles that came across. Lots of my news stories were Not the Bee this week because the Not the Bee was just on fire. But so COVID is being blamed for an increase in avalanche deaths. It's the U.S.'s deadliest avalanche season in years. Experts say COVID is partially to blame. The coronavirus pandemic has wreaked havoc on the U.S. economy, healthcare system, and schools. Some experts say it's also to blame for a recent spike in avalanche deaths. Every storm brings a different type of snow, which builds in layers. This year, the weaker layers are deep in the snowpacks, while the stronger layers are on top. That makes for an incredibly unstable surface, says Brian Lazar, Deputy Director of CAIC. I don't know what CAIC is, but who cares? This year we are seeing a pretty dangerous snowpack, the kind of unique conditions that only come around once every 10 years or so. Lazar told CNN this structure is highly conducive to producing avalanches. You'd think that would be the main story, but there's a narrative to support. COVID is terrifying and is going to kill us all, so we move to the third thing you need to know, a trigger. And a trigger is basically people disrupting the snowpacks with their activity. So how is COVID responsible for this? Well, COVID spreads in closed spaces. People are seeking out open spaces which are deemed safer, and among these open spaces are ski slopes and snow-covered mountains in the backcountry where you can engage in various winter activities such as skiing, snowboarding, and snowmobiling. So you're going to cause avalanches because of these precarious conditions. So COVID is to blame. Along with that narrative of fear COVID, be afraid, be very afraid. That's the point. I gotta say this every time. There are legitimate concerns with COVID. There are portions of the population who are extremely high risk. Even for the portions that are low risk, there's that odd anomaly where a young, healthy person will die from this disease. Freedom's more important. That's the reality. Freedom is more important. But the narrative is, and this touches on what Jordan Peterson was talking about, the narrative reality touching objective reality. Narrative is powerful, and the narrative is COVID is scary. Fear, be afraid, be very afraid. And one of the articles, the headlines from the New York Times brought this to light. Here's the headline. COVID-19, the U.S. is edging toward normal, alarming some officials. That was the actual New York Times headline. The U.S. is edging towards normal, alarming some officials. A single dose of the AstraZeneca vaccine can protect older people. A study shows California reaches a deal that encourages schools to reopen. Normalcy. Whoa, pump the brakes. Pump the brakes. We don't want people getting back to, their lives. Control. Be afraid, be very afraid. It's much easier to control, to sin against a scared populace than a free one. Final little piece of COVID news for you to mull about. And I actually want you to come to your own conclusions. I'll give you my opinion, but you should go read this yourselves. The CDC released a new study that they conducted from March 1st through December 31st, 2020. that talks about the association between state-issued mask mandates and dining capacity limitations and COVID-19 levels and death rates. So what's the relationship between the state saying you have to wear a mask and you can't go eat out and COVID-19 levels? And the association so the summary, this is where it's hard for me to think that the CDC is really still being objective when you read this kind of stuff. So I'm just going to read the summary. What is already known about this? So this is reading from cdc.gov. What is already known about this topic? Universal mask mandates and avoiding non-essential indoor spaces are recommended to mitigate the spread of COVID-19. What is addressed by this report? Mandating masks was associated with a decrease in daily COVID-19 case and death growth rates within 20 days of implementation. Allowing on-premises restaurant dining was associated with an increase in daily COVID-19 case growth rates 41 days to 100 days after the implementation, and an increase in daily death growth rates 61 to 100 days after implementation. So basically, what they're saying is this study shows that if you let people eat in restaurants, you'll have more COVID cases. And if you don't have a mask mandate, you'll have more COVID cases. Having a mask mandate decreases the total amount. That is technically a true statement. Now, let's talk about degrees. An obvious, reasonable follow-up question. Okay, if a national mask mandate decreases the daily COVID-19 cases and death growth rates, how much does it decrease them? Because there are other attendant costs to shutting down restaurants and forcing people to wear masks and frightening people. There are suicide rates that increase. There are economic impacts. There's $1.9 trillion spending bills that get passed in the name of this crap. So how much does this stuff help? That is a very important, legitimate question. And the answer is less than 2% across the board. Read this whole study, and you will see that during March, here I'm going to read the paragraph. During March 1st through December 31st, 2020, state-issued mask mandates applied in 2,313 of the 3,142 U.S. counties. Mask mandates were associated with a 0.5 percentage point decrease in daily COVID-19 case growth rates 1 to 20 days after implementation, and decreases of 1.1, 1.5, 1.7, and 1.8 percentage points between 21 and 100 days. And broke it up by 20-day increments. All of it less than 2%. Now, don't get me wrong. 2% of the total number of people who have died from this is a substantial amount of people. But it's still less than 2% of the total. So compare that, balance that risk, that cost in your mind with the other costs. The economic impact, the social impact, the societal impact of degrading public awareness and common sense. Exact same results for the death rate associated with denying people the right to run a restaurant. Less than 2% across the board. And yet, this is the study that's used as the major justification for why mask mandates are good and why we got to stop people from having restaurants. Can't let people go out and eat because they would have an increase of a 2% chance of catching COVID. When there's a 0% chance of rain and when there's a 2% chance of rain, I generally assume it's not going to rain. Now, I could be wrong. Technically speaking, 2 out of 100 times when I make that gamble, I'm going to be wrong. I'm still going to take that chance. Now, you might not. If it's an acid rain, and you might run the risk of dying from going out in this rain, and you say there's a 0% chance that you're going to die from going out in this rain, and there's a 2% chance that you're going to die from going out in this rain. Some people are still going to go out in the rain, and some people aren't, and they should be free to do so. That's my point. Freedom is better. Let people make decisions. Let people think for themselves. Oh, going on to the meat segment.
The meat segment.
We eat something's flesh. I want meat.
Go ahead and give the show a like and a subscribe and a notification bell and all that stuff that you're supposed to do on YouTube and iTunes and Spotify and SoundCloud and Podbean and wherever else you're listening or watching. Odyssey. Eventually we'll get it up there. And yeah, I would really appreciate it. The way that you grow podcasts, the way that this stuff gets out there and where this becomes like, more of a use of my time than just entertainment. Eventually I'll get bored with this, so you got to give me some kind of reason to keep doing it if you want it around. It'd be to like and subscribe, share with your friends, talk about it, say, this guy makes some points and he got me thinking and he entertained me a little bit, and I would really appreciate it. Hopefully you hear some good stuff on here. If you don't and you hate me and you want other people to hate me too, hey, tell your friends about it. How awful is this guy? Meat segment today. We're going to go a little bit over my 1 hour time limit just because I skipped a week. So it'll probably be an hour and 15, hour, 20-minute show. That's okay. I want to talk a little bit about humor. I am a big fan of stand-up comedy. I really enjoy humor. I wish that there was more stand-up comedy that was clean, because I have a certain tolerance level. It's just like, this is just the territory that stand-up comedy comes along with gross people who do gross things. But I do hit my limit with a lot of it. And so if I make it 5 minutes in and I've already heard like 10 things that have made me go, then I don't watch the rest of the special. And that's about half of them, unfortunately. But the other half, I enjoy watching stand-up comedy and thinking about how comedy works. I'm not good at it, unfortunately. I wish that I were better at comedy than I am. That's why I need... Ty, I miss you. I hope you're watching. I need to have you on the show sometime now that I'm back on video. Relive the glory days of those 2 whole episodes we did. Ty was hilarious, and I love the guy to death. But I'm just not that funny. My humor lies in sarcastic insults, not in actual humor. But the philosophy of humor, the idea behind it, I like to think I understand a little bit. And there was this event, so to speak, this news story that got me thinking about humor this week. It was Burger King. Burger King tweeted out, it's funny if you understand what I'm going to talk about for the next 10 minutes. Burger King tweeted out, this was the whole tweet, women belong in the kitchen. Now, that's the reason that's funny is because what are they saying, right? That is a very inflammatory statement, particularly in our day and age, because women belong in the kitchen is a phrase that communicates some sort of a patriarchal society where women were devalued, taken out of context. The point they're making is they operate a lot of kitchens and they want to see more women in successful careers. And so they were trying to promote their scholarship program that they have, where the employees can go to school and to better themselves when they work for Burger King. They were putting forward a very pro-woman, second wave feminism message that is really not that controversial, right? Said in a controversial way, intending to try, rile people up a little bit and hopefully make people laugh. Like, that was the hope. You got to think that Burger King thought, this will people have a little bit of a sense of humor. Wrong they were. The internet has no humor. The overwhelming response to this was, Burger King is so misogynistic. Burger King, how dare you make light of the plight of women through our society? Why would you say something so tone deaf? I can't believe that. I'm never going to Burger King again. It's the worst in the world. Now it is, but that aside, why is this the response? And I think it has to do with the humorlessness that is the left's worldview. The humorlessness that is the feminist worldview. humor is, in my opinion, a good thing given by God. Humor is, how did I put it? I made a note about this. Humor is most often at root a subversion of expectations in an ironic and unrealistic way. Humor is a commentation on reality, in a shocking and funny way. It's hard to describe exactly what is humor. Dictionary definition: the ability to perceive, enjoy, and express what is amusing, comical, incongruous, or absurd. And I actually really like that. The ability to perceive, enjoy, or express what is incongruous or absurd are the last two descriptions. Now, because I'm a nerd, I went and looked up the etymology of humor. Humor actually comes from an old French word that means liquid. And so how did it come to mean what we mean by funniness, right? It was this liquid was used in Middle Ages medicine, where people would talk about the four major liquids or fluids that are in the body, and when your liquid level was at a certain place, it would produce different states of mind. So you have a higher level of this liquid and a lower level of that liquid at this particular moment. You'd have this mood or this state of mind produced, and so humor started being referring to not the liquid that produces the state of mind, but the state of mind itself. And then somewhere in the 1600s or so, it started being used to describe a particular state of mind, meaning, whimsy, basically, caprice. And then it you can see the connection there, then how it kind of took on the current definition. All of that, no charge. The rest of it, give me money. The left can't perceive the incongruous or the absurd, and that's why they can't enjoy this humor. There's a common phrase on the internet called the left can't meme, and the reason the left can't meme, if you ever look at leftist ideology put into meme format, the standard stereotype is it's this big block of really small text put over some sort of a meme format, and in the end there still was no real joke made. It was just a rant. And a good example of this, actually, of where humor turned to humorlessness, is the life of George Carlin. George Carlin was a comedian who has some routines. He was always kind of crass and always edgy. Most humor is edgy because it's looking at reality and commenting on it from an ironic and a shocking way, usually, to try and jar you and make you think of reality in a different way than you previously thought of it. He had a great bit on cats and dogs. Cats always look like they're testing new eyes. If you're okay with foul language, I would encourage you to look up George Carlin, Cats and Dogs. Cats, when they're born, they're just ready to fight. Anyway, he was really funny in his early career, and his later career, he just became a grumpy old codger who just sat around and complained, and he just ranted. He wasn't funny anymore. He was just annoying. And he was even ranting about stuff that I largely agreed with. Like he's kind of a libertarian figurehead, but it wasn't funny because he lost kind of the grounding, the mirth, the reality that he was commenting on. And this the reason the left can't meme is because it doesn't have a good grasp of that reality. How do I put it here? Everything that the left does is oh so serious. Everything is about how someone will feel and whether or not someone will be offended by what is said. The prime objective, the prime worry of the left worldview is, the prime worry of the left worldview is whatever God said, we're gonna say the opposite of that. The secondary worry is humans are the most important thing in the world. So it's part of just rejecting what God has said, right? God has created humans to serve and worship Him, and the sin nature is to say, well, humans are created to serve and worship humans, and then ultimately, when that doesn't pan out, we'll serve serve and worship four-footed handmade idols than creatures. And just read Romans 1, and it's just a progression of what we'll serve and worship other than God. But humans are where we're at right now in our history, in history of the American expression of the sinful nature. And the left, the prime god to fear is human sentiment. It's, I am offended, and others might be offended by what I say, and so I have to be oh so serious. I can't make light of any human experience. I can't invalidate someone's lived experience. That would be so wrong of me. And I say, in the public sphere where you're not talking to someone specifically, you should be able to make light of all experiences. That's one of the joys of reality, is knowing that it's not all that serious. That God has created us to be joyful beings who recognize eternity with Him as the primary good, the primary goal, the wish that we should have at our core. And it puts all of this other stuff in perspective. The gospel itself gives me the possibility of seeing the bright side, seeing the humorous, the funny, the tragic, really. Like lots of humor is based on lots of stuff that really is objectively funny is based on bad stuff. It's the existence of evil. You can almost say that humor is a gift from God for how we cope with our production of evil in this world. It's a means by which we look at all of this horrible stuff that happens and say, isn't it great that God is in control? Isn't it great that God has made a way out of this? Isn't it good? Like we can see reality, and we can make fun of the current reality, knowing what reality is coming. The gospel truth is the thing that's at the center of that allows humor to be humor. And it's why leftist humor ends up always, it's putting man in the place of God, and then ultimately it just becomes humorless. It idolizes, it places human will, human desires, human offense, human victimhood, not human victims, human victimhood, in the place of God, and says that's the thing that must be worshipped. That's the thing that must be considered before anything else. And it ultimately breeds, death is the easy way to put it, but humorlessness, to be sure. I'll go ahead and end it there, so you don't have to hear me ramble for another 15-20 minutes. I love talking about humor. I love good humor. Good jokes. Good jokes are the spice of life. I guess I'll finish it off with one of my favorite jokes. I don't think I've told this joke on the podcast before. It is one that my grandfather told me. My grandfather had 7 or 8 jokes that were his favorite that he told me all the time. And this one is about Moses and Jesus playing golf. So Moses and Jesus are out playing golf, and they come up on this beautiful par 3. It's about 170 yards, and Jesus pulls out. He looks at it. There's water in the front of it, 170 yards to the pin, and looks at it. And he says, "Okay," and he pulls out a 9-iron. And Moses says, "Jesus, you can't hit this shot with a 9-iron. You need at least a 6, at least a 6-iron." And Jesus looks at Moses and he says, "Look, Jordan Spieth can hit this shot with a 9-iron, so can I." So, side note, when I was told this, it was Jack Nicklaus, because that's my grandfather's favorite golfer. Jordan Spieth's my favorite golfer, so Jordan Spieth gets to have the spot here. So says Jordan Spieth can hit this shot with a 9-iron, so can I. And Moses says, "Okay." So Jesus lines up, he hits the ball. Of course, it goes in the water. So Moses parts the water. Jesus goes, gets his ball, and comes back, sets it back up on the tee, and then he pulls out his 9-iron again. And Moses says, "Jesus, you can't hit this shot with a 9-iron. You need at least a 6." And Jesus says, "Look, Jordan Spieth can hit this shot with 9 irons, so can I." So he hits the ball and it goes in the water again. Moses parts the water. Jesus goes in, gets his ball, comes back, sets it up on the tee, and he pulls out his 9-iron again. And Moses says, Jesus, you can't hit this shot with 9-iron. You need at least a 6. And Jesus says, look, Jordan Spieth can hit this shot with 9-iron, so can I. And Moses says, well, I'm not helping you get your ball back this time. You're on your own. And Jesus says, okay. So hits the ball. Of course, it goes in the water. So Jesus is out walking on the water, looking for his ball. And Moses is sitting on the tee box. And, they've been there for a while. So this group comes up behind him. And they're talking to Moses. And then they look out and they see Jesus walking on the water. And they go, who's that guy think he is, Jesus? And Moses says, no, he thinks he's Jordan Spieth. Oh, it's one of my favorite jokes. Thank you, Granddad, for sharing it with me. If you want to write back to the show, send your emails to Stephen@reasonedrefrain.com. That's Stephen, Stephen, at reasonedrefrain, ReasonedRefrain.com. Colossians 3:16, let the word of Christ dwell in you richly, teaching and admonishing one another in all wisdom, singing psalms and hymns and spiritual songs with thankfulness in your hearts to God. You'll hear me next time unless Jesus comes back before then. Reasoned Refrain is written and produced by Stephen Curto. The views and opinions expressed in this episode are my own and should not be taken as reflective of any institution with which I am associated. Theme song written and performed by J.J. Anderson and Stephen Curto, mastered by J.J. Anderson. Reasoned Refrain is the property of Stephen Curto, all rights reserved.